Hey guys, this is Kirop speaking, and in today's Little Dev Update we are going to take a look at what I hinted at in the recent patch notes, which is some behind-the-scenes calculation stuff for engines. And that is what we are going through today. But let me first mention that things are still going well, even though, as always, taking longer than expected. Oh, surprise! Automation taking longer than expected. This has never happened before. You're right. Yes, campaign is coming along nicely. We are in the final stages of testing before this is re-added to the game. And as you can see here, in this build is actually not deactivated, and there is a little trick on how to play it in the current version you have, but it is not even recommended as an alpha because it will still be a little too buggy. But that is going to change pretty soon. In the next 1 or 2 weeks, I would think, is the time where we are going to release the updated campaign version. Alright, you have been receiving patches pretty regularly, apart from this last month, where we have been working on a lot of different things behind the scenes. So you're only seeing like 40-ish% of what we actually have done in the last month in this patch that just released. And I'm going to show you part of that stuff that you haven't seen in today's little discussion video. It is about turning the engine designer into an actual, more of a simulation than was previously the case. You might wonder, what if it wasn't a simulation? Kirop, what was it then? I would say it was a parameterization, and it still is to a degree, but it's moving away from that more and more in a very nice way. Let's talk about this. Well, this is a new thing. We are starting our little journey of looking into what is new by looking at a mock-up in Photoshop. And this one is outdated once again, I just see, but it will serve for the purpose here. So, one of the big discussions that was mentioned in the last Little Dev Update, which is way too long ago, was that we are going to remove the timing slider, and we had some kind of margin, fuel octane margin or fuel tune slider that is going to replace it. So that is something that has been investigated a lot more, and it was done so as part of taking those updated turbo calculations and wanting to feed the naturally aspirated calculations through that same loop and update it at the same time so that it has more features. So the original plan was to change up the timing slider and combine, or rather press the delete button on the timing slider and nuke the AFR slider as well, because you don't set a singular AFR, you don't set a singular timing either. That's not how it works. And then we replace it with a fuel map slider, which you can tune up or down, rich or more lean. And depending on what kind of fuel system you have, you get differing results, depending on what the fuel system is capable of and how tunable it is. So a little bit more integrated. And then we have some kind of margin or timing slider down here in the required fuel, or the fuel type you have chosen. And you currently have a slider that's saying fuel tune, and it doesn't do anything apart from limit your octane at the moment, which of course is not the intended functionality of it. But yes, so this is what we're going to aim for. And then I was like, well, there's now room here for another slider. What could we do with it? Let's talk about this first, because it's so nice and easy in comparison to what is to come afterwards. This here goes nicely together, and when I say this here, I mean the system sizing slider, goes nicely together with how we have laid out the new intakes, and we go to the other one, the exhaust as well. You now have an additional slider in the exhaust tab too. Not in this patch that you're playing at the moment, but this is going to be implemented all at once now, before we move on in 4.2. or is going to come as one of the large 4.2 changes that is going to take a little bit longer to implement. Hopefully not more than like 2-ish weeks though. Oh, well, it's all done in the... We're going to take a look at it. It's all already done, because that is what I've been doing for the last like 3.5 months. Anyway, so yes, system sizing. What does it do? Well, it sizes your intake and fuel system. Did any of you ever want to have larger carburetors? Because that is a real thing people do. Of course, you scale the carb according to your demands. If you put it on a massively under-square engine, which where we currently in automation put a tiny carb on it, well, that just strangles the whole engine. But then you can slide it to larger and compensate to a degree for that too small size. But also, it affects the intake resonances and flow. So that you, if you have a system, which for instance is a very small engine, let's go the other way. It's a very small engine, very high revving engine, very sporty engine, and you are basing it on a performance mid or something, a performance high, because you're revving it high. So you want to have the resonances up high. But then it doesn't have any flow. So what do? Well, previously it didn't matter. Now it will matter that there is no flow up there. The system needs to be properly designed in size now to actually give you those resonances. If you don't flow anything through there, then you won't see the resonances pop up. You need to be close to the design flow of the system. And that is where the slider comes in. If you slide it to smaller, resonance moves up in this frequency spectrum, so higher frequencies. That means higher RPM. And if you make it larger, they move lower. So what you could do is make a high performance system come down in resonance and become more flowy, or you can make it smaller, i.e. less flowy, and move the resonances up. The same you can do with every single one of those. Keep in mind that you need to design it such that the flow of the intake roughly matches that of the actual engine, and then, well, that's the tricky part, because the flow at lower RPM will never be really that close to your design flow unless you want to sacrifice high-end power, which also makes this a very nice nuance to have available to you. You can make it too small, as in, well, a little smaller here on this scale, too small for the engine, which means that it's going to limit you up on top. But if you have selected a standard low, for instance, which has the resonances very down low, then you might be able to just get a lot of resonance effect down there and make it really efficient. So there's a lot of things you can play around with there. And the same thing is true if we go over here to the exhaust tab revamp, where you have the header size and the according resonances work in the exact same way. It's also, you need to design, you have to design flow roughly where you want to have your resonances, if you want to see those resonances. And if you are strangling your engine too much, then, well, you're going to have some pressure drops over that. What? Pressure drops? Yes, all that is now properly calculated as we are moving for both the intake and header calculations, even for naturally aspirated engines, through the new turbo calculations, which track pressures and temperatures throughout the entire engine. But now what we are going to take a look at next is the rabbit hole that went all too deep on the calculation side and is now pretty much done, as we're going to take a look at what this slider is going to do first. And let's leave it at that for now, and then go into the actual timing and fuel margin stuff. So, fuel map. What does this slider do? Well, let me show you its features. Oh yay, spreadsheets, my favorite thing in the world. Yes, yes, welcome to automation. Ah, yes. Well, this is my my little drafting or pre-prototyping spreadsheet for implementing actual fuel maps. Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. Some of you might know what this is. others don't. So let me briefly explain. The engine can operate in various conditions, and those conditions mainly depend on what RPM it's currently at. This is the vertical space here, and what throttle setting you're currently using. So if you want to accelerate hard and push the throttle down, you want something to happen, usually. And that means it can't run the same amount of fuel when you're at full throttle versus when you're at cruising throttle. So we have this slider here. Let's make it bold. Oh no, that changes the line. Yeah, that's why I didn't do it. Anyway, so let's just say the engine goes from 700 to 6,700, and we are going to tune this with our little slider, which we had system sizing over here. This is the fuel map slider. You remember? Yeah, that's exactly it. So this slider now is being set to 20, and you now see then the green stuff here. That is kind of lean running. While the orange and red stuff is rich running. When you are putting the pedal to the metal, you are usually using quite a bit of fuel, and you need to, because otherwise the engine will also tend to run into knock and so on, and if you run very rich mixtures, that is alleviated to some degree, but it's also alleviated by very lean mixtures. Problem being that very lean mixtures don't provide nearly as much power. That's why you don't use this as much. There are very special cases where you do, like in Formula 1 modern stuff. That's crazy tech. But in here, yes, we're going more rich. So, as you can see, we are in a very... let's start with idle. Like around idle, this engine goes from 700 to 6,700. There. This range, right? And let's mark it. This is our beautiful pink rev range. Oh my god, this hurts my eyes. Stop it, get up. Alright, so around idle you need to have a little bit of fuel so that it's actually gets you going and doesn't die on you. So, cool. You have... these numbers, by the way, I should probably explain what you're looking at, right? This is Lambda. Welcome to Lambda. This is like AFR for pros. Because, well, this is true for every fuel. It's not just gasoline. So you want to do everything as generic as possible. And then you just state the Lambda value, and 0.95 lambda equals, let's say 0.95 times 14.7. That is basically 14.0 AFR, to put that into context. So the only thing you do is take this number times the stoichiometric ratio, and that is for gasoline 14.7, and then you have your AFR ratio. Right? You with me? Cool. So now let's change this map around a bit. We start at 0, and you can see how it changes. So up to very high throttles, you're running pretty lean on a very lean fuel map. If we start to increase this a little, you see how on the high throttle side, this is throttle 1, which means maximum, and this is throttle 0, which means minimum. You see that, it's creeping into some richer fuel mixtures. And we should take out the boost as well, like this. Okay, now it's correct. So let's do this again. They have it at 90. Let's go to 50 fuel map, and you see how this cruise area of very lean mixtures kind of shrinks. And if we go even higher, let's go to 75, shrinks even more, and the high power area where you get 0.85 is the very best for maximum power. You increase that area, and then you go to 100, and you get basically a map that never goes beyond stoichiometric on the lean side, but provides plenty of power. Like from 80% up, you're basically just putting fuel in so that you get optimal power out of the engine. And that is roughly how it works in real life. Like, you could take this map that I generate and probably put it into an engine and it would work. It's not too far off. So, yeah, at least the modern engine which can like automatically adjust a few things as you run into a knock and so on. But this is pretty realistic. And now finally solves the big mindfuck that was the previous setting of AFR, because AFR is not a singular value, never is. It is, well, it's a singular value for an RPM in a very specific driving situation. Then it is one AFR, but otherwise it always dynamically changes. Even for very old engines, they had vacuum advance and they had centrifugal advance. So with RPM, centrifugal, and with throttle, that is the vacuum advance. So even those old engines had means of adjusting the AFR on the fly for different driving conditions. Of course, they were a bit more stupid in that they didn't have a temperature sensor, they didn't have NOx sensors to dynamically adjust things, but the gist of it is now we have proper underlying fuel tuning in automation. On the surface level, you are still wiggling a slider. But on a calculation level, and from what we can display, this now means you have pretty realistic underlying calculations that are the foundation for what you see. I think that feels a lot better, and of course it is required. Why do we do this? It is required for the other calculations that we are going to take a look at to work properly, like the turbo calculations, like the timing calculations, and so on. Alright, let's dig deeper into it. Now I think it is a good time to talk about timing and also compression and octane requirements. Because, well, the fuel map does inform to some degree, to a reasonably minor degree, I was surprised actually, to a reasonably minor degree it informs how much octane requirements your engine has. It does inform also what kind of temperatures you're running, but there are other dependencies in there. This, what you're looking at here, is the very much updated prototyping simulation that I've been programming in the past, like I said, 3 months-ish, which now has an NA path. And you're looking at it here. I can now switch between NA engines and turbo engines. If we just up it slightly there, you can see the turbo engine popping in. And now, what we can, where do we start even? Alright, let's start with, I've now actually hooked up the compression calculations to both turbo engines and NA engines. NA engines had decent dependencies before, but they were always somewhat off and never really were able to simulate the older engines, which were also able to run some reasonably high compression ratios, like 10 to 1 and whatnot. In automation they weren't, so something there was wrong, and that has been changed now, well, at least in this prototype. And let's see, so we have a little engine sitting here. This is all over the place, but so it's a 2-liter engine, 2-liter inline 4, and we are in design year 2020. MPFI this is supposed to be roughly. And you see that we currently have an octane requirement of 87 RON, roughly. And now I can increase that RON rating, and what you see now, this is how it's going to work, by the way. This is not how it's going to be visualized, but how it's going to be working underneath the surface. So let's see what it does. So I'm increasing compression, and what you can see here is the little thin line up on top, right? And now you see that this one is going down a little bit. And as I increase compression, it goes down more and more. What is this? This is complete retardation. It actually is. So we are retarding the timing of the engine in order to meet the octane requirements, because you were seeing that, like at 8.5 to 1, well, it just runs. It never runs into any issues there with that 98 RON fuel availability. It's perfectly fine. What you do see here as the solid or the darker red line is the torque you would be producing as a point of reference. This is our base cam curve. And the lighter and slightly thicker or reddish orange line, is the actual torque that is being delivered. All these calculations are going to be C++ side now that we have these calculations. This is going to be implemented very soon. So as we increase compression, I'm increasing in steps of 0.5, so pretty large steps. You see that, oh yeah, the octane requirement went up significantly there. And now we are hitting that kind of peak. Previously in automation, what would have happened is that it would be saying like, no, now you're using 99 octane and now you can go and play in the garden or fuck yourself. No, it's knocking, so you can't do this. Well, that's not how it works. So what you can of course do as an engineer is then to say, well, but we do have that thing that is called timing. If we retard timing away from optimal torque, then what we are going to do is significantly lower the octane requirements. So let's do this. How much power do you actually lose by doing that? Well, the answer is, as long as you retard timing by only very little, it barely impacts performance. But it does impact significantly the octane requirements. Aha! Okay, now you can see light bulbs go up in your heads over there. So here we go. We increase this further and you see, oh yeah, timing drops. By the way, let me tell you what the scale is, because this is just thrown in by myself in this graph so that I have it somewhere. The 400 line here, this is 0. This means it is exactly perfect for torque. Well, what perfect is really depends. It's probably not perfect for torque because you have gains lying on the table elsewhere which you could have used instead. But this is peak torque timing. That is what it is. Down here at 300 is 25 degrees of spark advance lost. So 25 degrees retarded timing. And that means significant drops in power compared to the 0, which we have up there. And as we increase, you can see, oh, this is beautiful. Look at this. So here, we are already capped out. We only have taken out like a degree or so of timing. Everything is still dandy. Now look at what happens with the torque curve up here. We go one more step, it still goes up. Next step, it still goes up. And now, it stays. But what happens down here? It still moves up. That's interesting. How's that, Kirob? Well, how's that? Well, under these driving conditions that you have here, in the lower rev range, you usually don't need as much octane. And why is that? Well, because your engine isn't volumetrically as efficient. And you can see this by the cyan line that I have in here. The pressure in bar is the effective cylinder pressure that we have at the bottom of the intake stroke. And there's a bit of a vacuum in there because you can't fill the cylinder as effectively as at peak torque, where the volumetric efficiency rises to really decent levels. Around, for modern engines that are well-tuned, around 100%. You can go beyond 100%. Like race engines can reach up to like 115%. Magic! They use the momentum of the air flowing in to trap it at exactly the right time and get a larger charge in without supercharging. It's like a momentum charging effect. But anyway, here we have lower cylinder pressure, and the fuel octane requirements actually are very sensitive to pressure, especially under pressure. So you can further, you don't have to advance, you don't have to retard timing as much for these lower RPM. This is full throttle at the moment. Throttle position 1. There you have that. Okay, so we increased it further, and now you see that, oh, look! At the high end, with 12 to 1, we're still keeping it automatically at 98 requirement, because we only have 98 fuel. But as we increase it further now, we have to sacrifice so much timing on the high end that we are actually losing power. While at the low end, we're still gaining a little bit, but we're like, it's marginal gains. So what is the situation at different throttle positions then? That would be interesting to know as well, right? So let's take a look. So I'm going to go to 10% throttle. Can't run at 10% throttle. There's too much friction. This is another thing that is done properly now in these calculations. It is that the friction is not baked into anything else, but applied at the correct time afterwards. So first the engine works as an air pump, which is powered by fuel, and then we see how much power it would produce, and then we subtract all the friction from it. And at throttle position 10%, there is just nothing left over. It's all friction. At 20%, you see that, you have mighty engine at 3,000 RPM. It makes like 10 Newton meters of torque. You can't drive it with that, can you? No. So throttle position 30% is probably the very lowest you can get with this engine for it to still be somewhat drivable, maybe. Maybe cruising at 50 kilometers an hour, 60 kilometers an hour, this would be roughly right at 2,000 RPM. And then we increase it further, and you see how it's going up, 70%. And you see how the timing needs to be retarded more and more and more as you move to higher throttles. So what we can do now is tune the engine to certain throttle positions. You can do something very sneaky, very sneaky. You can run way too high compression, and that is kind of useless at maximum throttle. And then say, please, people, don't drive this car beyond 70% throttle, because it's very efficient then. It's very efficient thanks to my tuning. But please don't go beyond 70%, because then it becomes a horror show. That is now a real thing, and that means that economy calculations will be way more realistic as well. I do have all the actual outputs in my log here somewhere. Let's see. So here we have this. That's just my code base here. Down here we have some log outputs. You can see the engine efficiency at various points, 31% there, 29% dropping, brake-specific fuel consumption and everything in there. But yes, let's move back to here. So now let's add a turbo into the picture. Let's smash it out there, and let's wait. What happens? Okay. Now, yes. Okay. This is not healthy timing. Please don't try this at home. You will, but okay. We're increasing the pressure a little bit more. So, beautiful. And now turbine size up, because it's strangled just ever so slightly. Right. This compression, 14.0 at 1.7 bar on 98, means that we have to retard timing way too much. Just way too much in order to make this engine run and not knock. Alright, now let's bring in another thing to make this even more complicated. No, it's actually not complicated. Don't forget that you actually only have the fuel map slider and this margin slider. How does the margin slider work? Well, not like here. It doesn't say the degrees of whatever. You don't have to tune your engine for the timing. It is done automatically and told to you what your engineers had to do in order to not make it knock. This needs to be visualized in a way that makes sense, and probably a lot better than what I have here with the line hanging from the top of the power torque curve. But if it is shown to you correctly, and maybe even the fuel octane requirements before the retardation of the timing, that would be a pretty good figure to know. Like, oops, I'm using 140 RON and I'm running 98. Could there be an issue with that? No. Okay, good. Thanks, Mr. Engineer. That's good to know. And then what you do set here though is, let's go back to here. Just like you do right now, you have that in the game. It's not properly hooked up. You are going to set the fuel tune. What is this slider? You can set it from or what you will be able to set, is from -10 to +5. If you set it to +5, basically what you're going to tell your engineers is, yeah, we are running 95 RON, but you just go ahead and tune the engine to 100 RON, and it will be fine. Trust me, I'm a physicist. And then you likely will run into some reputation issues, and even more likely knock under almost all circumstances. You can go by +1 or maybe +2 though. And what you will see then is that most people won't notice. You do get more performance out of it. And also what happens is that you will see lower reliability, because there are plenty of situations where you will run into slight knock, which causes extra stress on the engine. And by the way, knocking that we currently have, how we currently have it in the game, is not realistic either. So we're going to change this and make it a lot more dynamic with this system. And that means that, yeah, for the most part your engine won't knock, but there are plenty of situations on hot summer days, when you're driving at sea level instead of 300 meters high, yeah, the engine might go into a bit of a constant knock, which isn't great. And when you're, of course, one of the big things is fuel batch quality varies quite a lot. That is why if you're going to the fuel pump and pump out 95, it isn't 95. What it is some number around usually 98. And it can vary like from maybe sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 96, sometimes it is 97, or maybe sometimes exactly 98. But it very rarely is as low as the number you actually thought it would be. And that means you can get away with a little bit of a push. And this 7.2 degrees is, I know it's confusing, and imagine there to be a +2 instead. So yes, this is what you're going to do with the timing slider, and we can adjust it here. Let's see what happens. So if we go in here and say to our engineers, no, we don't. I mean, 98, that is very conservative. So let's just say, oops, no, that's the wrong direction. 97, no, 98. Let's say we instead we just assume we have 100. So you see that quite a strong rise in the torque curve there from those just 2 steps. So now all of a sudden you have more power. At what price, you ask? Well, probably reasonably minor, because for the most part those fuel batches are actually within that range. But on average you will run into people having a lot more knock. Yeah. So it's a very nuanced little thing to adjust now. And yeah, if we go through the various throttle settings here too, you can see that it is fully simulated. Excuse that it's so slow. Every time I press any button, it currently recalculates everything, including this map, which doesn't change, so that's stupid at the moment. And of course that won't happen in game. It's just in I'm not a programmer, as you can see. Anyway, so here you can see, oh yes, at 30% throttle position, that's not bad. And you can see the spool point moving closer and closer. And there, yes, 60% throttle and 70% throttle. And here you see we are pretty much at the exact point where we offset all the pumping losses. That, by the way, is another thing that is being simulated. Pumping losses are now a part of our friction calculations. So if you run low throttle, you will have pumping losses. Previously they were kind of faked, and that's cool and all, but it's much more interesting if they are actually calculated and you get a more reasonable progression in all of that. So 70% throttle, this is now 80% there, and you see how much timing we need to pull out. This is because 14:0 compression. Let's take out compression and see what happens. So 13.5, you actually make more power. 13, you make more power because you have to pull out less timing. More power. 12, more power. notice, please, that you were able to run the engine on 98 with a little bit of positive thinking attached to it, setting it to 100. You were perfectly able to run that engine on that Octane. It just meant that it runs like shit. So complain to your engineer, please. Yes. So 11, still gaining some power, especially high end. Gaining more power at 10.5. 10, yeah, still more power. Still more power. 9.5, yeah, looking good. And now, there. There we actually, at 9.5 and 9, 9.5 I would say is the compromise to go for in this setting. If you're running on 98, 9.5 compression on an MPFI system with a boost of 0.7 bar, that is roughly 10 psi, I'd guess. Yeah, roughly, right? Yeah, around 10 psi. And it seems about right. Yeah. Then you don't sacrifice too much of the high-end power for pulling out timing. You're not running crazy temperatures there. By the way, increasing compression actually lowers the temperature because you the exhaust gas temperature, because you are letting the gas expand more on the way down, so that more of its energy is being absorbed and just taken out or dispersed in different ways. So yeah, running higher compression actually lowers your exhaust gas temperature. All that is now calculated, and I'm not making any claims to perfect accuracy here, but it is reasonably ballpark. Also what we can do is pull out some fuel map. We have the fuel map in here. This is completely mapped out for the different throttle positions as well. Let's set it to 0, and you could see that actually the temperatures did increase there. And that also means that you have to retard timing some more, because higher temperatures mean more knock, higher octane requirements. But yes, so let us now go and summarize some of the things that have changed here. And let's do it via these beautiful things, because that makes it much more easy to remember when you then see it in game. And this will take a little while to implement, but I mean, everything has been, the calculations are done in the background. So, not implemented yet, but they will be ported in and so on. It usually doesn't take long. We do now have system size sliders for both the headers and the intakes, as well as the fuel system. If you slide it up to larger, means more flow. If you slide it to smaller, means less flow. If you slide it to smaller, that means higher frequency resonances. If you slide it to larger, lower frequency resonances. You need to have a good flow for your whole system so that you actually see those resonances. Same for the headers. Alright, pretty simple. Fuel map. We now have a throttle dependent fuel map. Throttle versus RPM. Actual AFR ratios, or rather lambdas, for each one of those cells. And that was right there. Then we continue on, and we have the margin and timing, which currently already is in the game, but the only effect it has is changing the octane you have available without actually doing anything else. And that will change to what we said in here, where I give my engineers more room to advance timing instead of just taking it out. Alright, yes, also full new actual timing calculations, which do work in tandem with the compression and are automatically adjusted for you and will be visualized in a hopefully understandable fashion. We need to figure something out there. Yes, and all this interplays for both the naturally aspirated calculations and the turbocharged calculations. Whew, yeah. Without making the game more difficult to use. That is a very important point of it. So you get all the fidelity from the additional simulational aspects of it, while not necessarily having to deal with all the complexities of it. There is much more nuance that has been added to engine design. It is no longer a slide all the sliders to maximum or minimum or whatever, min-max. You can't do that anymore because everything is a compromise, just like in reality. which makes the engine designer and automation's gameplay so damn much better. Alright? Alright, I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your comments down below, and I see you guys next time.